In the ancient lands where dust met the gold of sunrise and caravans moved like rivers through the wilderness, a woman's name echoed across centuries: Hagar. She was not born among the tents of Abraham, nor among the hills of Canaan. Her blood came from the fertile banks of the Nile, from a people of sun and river, a land where kings were called gods and women held both strength and sorrow in their eyes. She was Egyptian, a servant whose destiny would cross paths with divine promise. Long before her footsteps were lost to the sands of Shur, her story began in the house of Sarai, wife of Abram, a man chosen by God to become father of nations. Sarai's womb was barren and her heart grew weary with waiting. As was the custom of the time, when a mistress could not bear children, her maidservant could bear on her behalf. So Sarai looked upon Hagar, young, foreign, and capable, and said to Abram, "Go into my maid, perhaps I shall obtain children by her." The words carried both desperation and design. Abram, seeking peace within his household and trusting his wife's will, agreed. Thus Hagar was given, not as a wife of equal standing, but as a vessel of another woman's hope. And in that union she conceived. What began as obedience soon turned into tension. The scriptures tell us that when Hagar saw she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. Perhaps it was not arrogance, but the awakening of a long-suppressed dignity, that she, a servant, now carried the seed of Abram, the man of promise. But Sarai's heart burned with jealousy, for she had given her servant into her husband's embrace and found herself diminished in her own home. Conflict rose like heat from the desert. Sarai complained to Abram, and Abram, unwilling to choose between them, said, "Behold, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as you please." The words gave power to resentment. Sarai dealt harshly with Hagar, and in her anguish the Egyptian fled, running from the tents of Abraham into the wild, toward the unknown lands of Shur, the border between Canaan and Egypt. It was there, in the wilderness, near a spring on the road to Shur, that Hagar stopped. Exhausted, pregnant, alone beneath the weight of her sorrow, she sat beside the waters. The wind whispered through the dry reeds. The earth was silent but for her sobbing. Then in that silence the divine entered. The record tells us that an angel of the Lord found her by the spring and spoke her name. "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" She replied with the raw truth of her flight. "I am fleeing from the face of my mistress Sarai." And the angel said, "Return to your mistress and submit to her authority." But the message did not end in submission. It carried revelation. The angel declared that her seed would be multiplied beyond counting, and that the son she carried would be called Ishmael. God hears, for the Lord had heard her affliction. The prophecy continued. "He shall be a wild man, his hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren." At that spring in the wilderness, the Egyptian servant became the first in Scripture to name God. She said, "You are the God who sees me." And she called the place Beer-lahai-roi, the well of the living one who sees. From that moment, her suffering gained a divine witness. She returned, not as the same servant, but as one who had met God in the desert. Time passed. Ishmael was born, the child of promise to one woman, yet the child of tension to another. For 13 years, Hagar raised him in the tents of Abraham, the boy growing strong and untamed with the desert already in his soul. Abraham loved the child, teaching him the ways of the herds, the stars, and the covenant. Yet the promise of God still hovered over Sarai, soon to be Sarah, who at last, against all nature, conceived and bore Isaac, the son of laughter. The tents of Abraham filled with both joy and unease. 2 mothers, 2 sons, one born of a slave, one born of freedom, dwelling under the same roof. It was a fragile peace destined to break. When Isaac was weaned, a great feast was held. But Sarah saw Ishmael, then a youth, mocking, perhaps playing roughly, or perhaps laughing with the knowledge that he was no longer heir. Whatever the cause, the moment became fire. Sarah demanded, "Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son Isaac." Abraham was torn, for Ishmael was his son. But God spoke to him, assuring him that in Isaac would the covenant be established, yet Ishmael too would become a great nation. With a heart heavy as stone, Abraham rose early in the morning, took bread and a skin of water, and gave them to Hagar, placing them on her shoulder along with the child. There were no words that could soften such a parting. The desert stood waiting, and Hagar walked into it once more, a woman cast out by man yet seen by God. The wilderness of Beersheba stretched before her, vast and merciless. The sun blazed overhead. The water in the skin dwindled. She gave some to Ishmael, but the skin soon emptied. When she could bear no more, she placed the boy beneath the shade of a small shrub and walked a short distance away, saying, "Let me not see the death of the child." She sat opposite him and lifted her voice, and her cry rose like incense into the heavens. The record tells us that God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, "What ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Arise, lift up the lad and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin and gave the boy drink. The desert that had nearly become their grave became the birthplace of a nation. From that day, Ishmael grew and dwelt in the wilderness, becoming an archer, a wanderer, and father of tribes. Hagar found for him a wife out of Egypt, the land from which she herself had come. Thus the lineage of Ishmael began, a people of the desert, fierce and free, bound not by tents, but by horizon. The scriptures fall silent about Hagar after that, but history and tradition remember her as the mother of nations, the matriarch of those who dwell by the deserts of Arabia. Through Ishmael, her blood would course through countless generations, shaping tribes and kingdoms. Her story became a symbol of exile and endurance, of despair transformed into destiny. In her journey, Hagar embodies the untold voice of the oppressed, the cry of the unseen, the prayer of those wandering in barren lands. The God who saw her in the wilderness remains the same God who hears the afflicted. Her meeting by the spring of Shur stands as a moment of divine intimacy, the eternal stooping to comfort a forgotten woman. From a servant in bondage to a mother of nations, Hagar's life bridges the realms of faith and myth. In her, we see the mystery of divine purpose working through human sorrow. Though cast out from the tents of promise, she was never cast out from the sight of God. Her footsteps trace a line through Scripture and beyond, marking the place where divine mercy met human suffering. Even in later generations, the echoes of her cry can be heard. The well she named Beer-lahai-roi remains in the biblical memory as a symbol of vision and providence, a reminder that even in isolation, one is never unseen. The God of Abraham became also the God of Hagar, not in covenant but in compassion. In the wide tapestry of the ancient world, her story stands alone, the story of a woman, foreign and enslaved, whose encounter with the divine reshaped her destiny. In an age when women's voices were seldom recorded, hers was lifted up, preserved, and made eternal. Her tears watered the sands of Shur, and from them grew the roots of nations. Many centuries later, her name would still be spoken in reverence among peoples who claimed descent from her son, a lineage of wanderers, traders, warriors, and believers. Her legacy endures not only in genealogies, but in the image of faith itself. Faith that sees light even when surrounded by desert night. To stand at the edge of her story is to gaze into the heart of human endurance. The wilderness that once seemed her undoing became the place of revelation. The same desert that silenced her cries became the stage where the voice of heaven was heard. Her pain, recorded in the sacred text, becomes a mirror through which generations understand that the divine eye does not overlook the lowly. Her cry, the cry of the desert, still echoes across the centuries, carried by the winds of history. It speaks of all who have been cast out, forgotten, or made to wander. It tells of a God who not only commands stars, but stoops to meet the weary beside a spring. And in that truth, Hagar's story transcends time. She becomes not just the Egyptian servant of Abraham and Sarah, but a universal emblem of hope. Her encounter with the divine beside the water in the wilderness transforms her from a figure of sorrow into one of revelation. Through her, the world learns that the God of heaven sees not only kings and prophets, but the forsaken, the foreign, the fallen. When the voice of the angel spoke to her by the spring, it was not merely comfort, it was affirmation. The desert that was meant to break her became her altar. The tears that fell upon the sand became testimony. And though her name may have faded from the memory of men, it is etched in divine remembrance. In the language of myth, Hagar stands as the archetype of the wanderer, the mother of exiles. In the record of faith, she stands as the first to be seen and named by God in her suffering. And in the annals of human history, she remains the bridge between worlds, between servitude and freedom, despair and destiny, rejection and divine recognition. Her story whispers a lesson to every generation that follows, that faith is not confined to those within the covenant, that divine mercy is not limited by lineage, and that even in the wilderness the eyes of heaven are open. The God who heard Ishmael's cry and saw Hagar's tears continues to hear and to see. And so as the sun sets upon the endless dunes of time, the voice of the narrator would fade, leaving the viewer with the image of a mother lifting her child from the sand beside a well that still glimmers with divine reflection, a well that says, even now, the living one sees me. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell. More Bible figures await.